Hi guys, today we are going to be looking at using some of those personal pronouns that we've been talking about. And in class we've kind of been talking a little bit about how we can use him or her or she or he or him or she or her in place of someone's name. So for example, if you knew a kid named Nathan, instead of saying Nathan likes football, you could say he likes football, as long as the reader or the listener knows that you're talking about Nathan. So using a personal pronoun in writing, you need to make sure you've already used that person's name ahead of time so that the reader knows who you're talking about, right? So, all right, so let's take a look. We've got a friend named Ben, and we've got a friend named Olivia. And so we're gonna see which personal pronouns we could replace Ben with. So let's see this first sentence. Oops, I already did. Sorry, I clicked it. All right, it says Ben sits in the sun. All right, so would we say her sits in the sun or him sits in the sun? Yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? And you can kind of hear it, can't you? You can hear how it just doesn't sound quite right. All right, so what about she sits in the sun? Now, if Ben was a girl, she would work, right? If Ben is a boy, we would say he. Ben is oftentimes a boy's name, but you never know. You can never tell with names, right? Don't ever assume. All right, the next sentence says the sun warms Ben. So we already know we're talking about Ben. So we could say the sun warms he, the sun warms she. That sounds so weird. How about the sun warms her or the sun warms him? Would you agree? Yeah, him or her sounds better. Now, if we've already decided that Ben's a boy up here with he, down here we'll say he's a boy also. So the sun warms, yep, you're right, him. All right, number 2, Olivia stands in the water. Olivia stands in the water. All right, so would we say her stands in the water? Does that sound like a 3-year-old talking? It kind of does, doesn't it? Her stands in the water. You can just almost hear like your little brother or sister saying something like that, can't you? So you wouldn't say her, and you wouldn't say him stands in the water. What would you say? Yeah, she stands in the water. Remember, we're pulling from these options right here. So we've got he and him and she and her. She and her are if you're talking about a girl, and he and him are used if you're talking about a boy. All right, so down here this says, the water cools Olivia. So we know we're talking about Olivia, and we have decided she is a girl. So what would we say? The water cools, yep, the water cools her. Good job. All right, so we're still talking about Ben and Olivia. So we decided on the page before that Ben was a boy and Olivia was a girl. I say that because I have a niece who's 6 and her name is Bentley. And I think one of her friends calls her Benny. And that sounds kind of like a boy name, doesn't it? And I've actually taught a boy named Bentley, and then I have a niece whose name is Bentley, and she's a girl. So you just never know with names. So that's why I wanted to make sure. You just never know. You can't always assume. You kind of have to know the person, don't you? All right, so in this first sentence, it says, Ben floats on the water. And remember what I said it before? If we know in our writing who we're talking about, if we've already said the name, then in our next sentence, we don't have to write their name again. Now, that would be really helpful if you had a friend whose name was Rumpelstiltskin, right? Because then you wouldn't have to write that big, long name every single time. You could say, he did this and he did that. Once you've said it once, you don't have to say Rumpelstiltskin 14 times. So personal pronouns are really good for that reason. So since we know we're talking about Ben, how could we say it next? Instead of saying Ben floats on water, what could we say? We need to write he floats on the water. That's our personal pronoun for a boy. And you can hear again, him floats on the water doesn't make sense. Remember, we talked about last week, if we have a verb, our personal pronoun that comes before that verb is going to be like he or she or we. We wouldn't say him floats or her floats. Okay, or they floats. That doesn't sound right either. All right. Number 2, Olivia jumps into the pool. So we decided Olivia was a girl, so what would we write here? Yeah, she. And she and he are almost the same word. Do you notice that? So the only difference is there's an S at the beginning of she, and in he, there's an H at the beginning. All right, so do you see how she is right before the verb jumps? And remember, a verb is an action word. Float, jump, those are things our bodies can do, aren't they? All right, Olivia splashes Ben. So we could say Olivia splashes he. Olivia splashes she. What? How about Olivia splashes? Yeah, him. Olivia splashes him. And you want to see something that they did up here on this sheet that made it kind of sneaky and made it to where you had a hint of which one to use, because do you notice that he and she are capitalized? Do you notice that? That tells us that we should have those things at the beginning of a sentence, because remember, the beginning of a sentence always starts with a capital letter, doesn't it? All right, and do you notice here when we use the word pronoun him, it comes after the verb, so the verb comes first. All right, Ben laughs at Olivia. Hopefully he's laughing with her and not at her, right? So what would we say? Ben laughs at, yeah, her, at her. Good job. You're so smart. Her. Ben laughs at her. I've told you before, it's really hard to write with this little mouse in her finger. Okay, hopefully you learned a lot about personal pronouns and how to use them today. Good job.